Hey YouTube, how's it going? Kevin Cleary here with a knife video for you. Today I want to talk about giving some time and attention to the care and maintenance of your knife or knives. I want to start off with this knife. This is my Ontario Rat Model 1. I carried this and used it a ton. I've probably put this under more strain and used it in more difficult situations than any of the other blades that I own. Mostly because it is one of the knives that I carried for a very long time as my EDC. Probably a year and a half to 2 years I carried this with me all the time, everywhere. And it got pretty beat up in that time. You can see the wear just on the pocket clip that it's been through. Now, at the end of that time, and I'll admit I didn't know as much about knives as I know now, I was like, I've got to do something with this knife. So I took it apart, I cleaned it, I lubricated everything, I cleaned all the gunk and oil and everything else out of the knife, put it all back together, and it now functions so much more smoothly, nicely. At the time, you couldn't flick this open at all. It would not, in fact, it was hard to just open it slowly. It took a lot of pressure on the thumb stud and became really hard on your fingers. But take it apart, clean it up, and comes back together really, really well. Here's a sort of different example. This is my CRKT M21, another great knife, pretty heavy duty, nice thick piece of blade stock, hollow grind, VEF serrations. I really like this knife. I've carried it quite a bit as well. But this one came from the factory, brand new, and it would not flip. You would, go to flip it out like that and it wouldn't move. And so I messed with the pivot screw, got it to where it would move, and then there'd be just massive blade play. I was like, this sucks. What am I going to do? Like, this is a brand new knife. And I was starting to be disappointed. And anyway, after a little bit of time messing with it and playing with it, I realized, you know what, I'll bet you it just needs to be, I'll look at the pivot, see what's going on. So I took it apart, and what had happened is, this knife was probably manufactured maybe 2 years before I bought it. Let's say, I'm guessing totally. But it just sat in a warehouse and totally dried out, so that whatever lubrication they put on here was just dry and completely, gone, ineffective. So I cleaned it up, and actually whatever they had used kind of created a bit of a goo, and it was a little disgusting, but I cleaned it all up, got everything nice and clean, oiled it, put it back together, and guess what? Functions like a dream. Beautiful, beautiful flipping action now. No problems whatsoever. So even a brand new knife can sometimes need some care, some attention. I got a couple more to show you. Here's one. This is the Benchmade Doug Ritter Griptilian, and it functions extremely well now. But when I first got this, it was terrible. I got it used. I got it on the secondary market. And I got a great deal on it, but whoever had had it before obviously did not pay much attention to it. When it came, there was like dirt in all kinds of different places. You could not flip the knife like that at all. It just wouldn't go. You couldn't actuate the lock to open it or close it. It wouldn't function the way I'm used to all of my other Benchmates functioning. And so I'm like, this sucks. But I started looking and saw that there was like dirt and grime in different places. Again, took it apart, cleaned everything. I even cleaned, I took out each screw and cleaned out the threads. There's even kind of gunk in the threads. Under these screws, in the little drilled out holes, there was gunk in there, so I cleaned all that out. It was really bad. So I cleaned everything up, oiled it, put it back together, and again, perfectly functional. One last blade to show you, and this is one you know about because I have a whole video about not just this knife as a review, but even a video about the modification that I did to it, which was to strip it down and do some polishing and get everything, working better and, of course, looking much, much sharper as far as I'm concerned. So this is a knife, again, took it all apart, polished the pivots, polished the blade, stripped off the Teflon coating that comes from cold steel, and now end up with a much better blade out of the deal. By the way, if you buy a lot of cold steel blades, I would recommend that. Their Teflon coating, I'm not a fan of at all, although I'm a huge fan of cold steel knives. So there you go. So those are some of the knives that I have that have really benefited from just a little bit of time and attention, a little bit of care. Now, the next thing that I want to talk about is, what does that care entail? What do I mean when I say, show some care and maintenance to your knives? Well, primarily putting some oil in the pivot area, taking your knife apart and cleaning up areas that could be problematic. Of course, sharpening. And so you're going to need a set something like this. This is just a set of precision driver and bit set. That's what it's called, precision driver and bit set. And so it just gives you all those little Torx bits and Allen keys that you might need to take your knife apart. So you're going to need that. You're going to need some kind of oil, a high viscosity oil, and all I use is gun oil that you can get at like Canadian Tire or Walmart or anywhere else. Gun oil seems to work really well for lubricating. Now, before I get to that point, I usually clean everything off, clean the old lubrication off, and I often use baby wipes for that. I know that sounds strange, but if you buy good baby wipes, the ones that don't come apart, because you don't want little fibers of material in your blade, you can, a baby wipe, the ones that my wife buys, I can't remember what name brand they are, but they're fairly high quality. You can clean everything up, and there are two nice things about it. One, the cleaning solution that's on there is alcohol based, so when you're done using it, it evaporates nicely and doesn't leave any moisture in your whatever metal you're cleaning, whether it's the blade or the whatever screw threads or anything else. It's going to dry up really well, so you're not leaving a bunch of moisture behind. Number two, it cuts oil really well, so when you're cleaning a knife that's been lubricated before, or you're cleaning like that, like the CRKT. This had a bunch of gunk in it from the factory. It cleans that out really nicely, so it gives you a nice clean finish, plus it doesn't leave a lot of moisture behind. Now you may want, and I found this really useful, I don't have any examples here, but in my knives that have a pivot that has washer, that has ball bearings, any kind of ball bearing pivot knife, WD-40 is very helpful, because it can kind of get into all the little crooks and crannies in between all those little ball bearings and clean all the gunk and junk out of there. Now, I need to say this, WD-40 is not a lubricant, it's a cleaner. So don't use it as a lubricant, because that's not what it is. So if you're going to use it, just know that you need to still oil after. And by the way, you should wait until the WD-40 is kind of gone, because it will break down oil. So use your WD-40 to clean, and then wipe it off, maybe using a baby wipe, and then you want to oil. So for example, if let's say this had a pivot in here, I had a ball bearing pivot system, I would spray WD-40 in, I would work the pivot a bunch, I would leave it for a day. Every time I walked by the knife that day, I would work the pivot, I would move it around, and then the next day or so, I would put oil in. And I would do the same thing with the oil, move it around, let it sit. Oil tends to get into the crooks and crannies and stuff over a little bit of time, so it's worthwhile to wait a little bit for that oil to work its way through. So what I like to do is, after I oil a knife, I'll leave it sit for a day and a half, 2 days before I go ahead and start using it again. And you'll find oil has leaked out of everywhere, which is exactly what you want. So I mentioned WD-40, I mentioned the bit set. Finally, now that you kind of have an idea what tools you might find useful for that. By the way, you may need 2 Torx bits, because some blades you'll find you go to loosen one side and the other side just spins, so you'll need a second one to put in there. That's a useful thing to have, as a second Torx bit around. Now, what do I mean? Now, what can you do that I think is worthwhile? Well, one, a lot of knives will benefit if you take it apart, especially bronze phosphor bushings. Take the thing apart and polish with a really high metal polish, or really high grit sandpaper, like 4,000 or 5,000 grit, 8,000 grit, 10,000 even is, now 10,000 is like a mere polish. So anyway, a really high grit sandpaper, clean those washers up, clean up the blade, everything around the pivot area, just give it a little polish. Anywhere you're going to have metal on metal, doesn't hurt to just give it a quick rub. Don't go too crazy, you don't want to take off any material at this point, you just want to clean it up, smooth it out. So polishing is really helpful. Cleaning with WD-40 or those or those baby wipes that I mentioned, probably your gun cleaning oil, like whatever you use as your gun cleaner, that would probably work about as well as WD-40. I just find the WD-40 is convenient and available, and I'll save the gun stuff for my guns. Now, gun oil I do use and find very, very helpful. And so all of these pivots, they function really well. Where's a good example? Okay, this knife I oiled, oh gee, it would be a year ago at least, and the oil has not worn out. It's still well lubricated. It's still really, really smooth. And so yes, gun oil will wear out, but not that quickly. It's pretty stable and will stick around for quite a long time. And you can see this knife is smooth as silk. Notice how the blade will actually drop there when I disengage the lock. And that's because of the lubrication. And so, by the way, there are lots of other things you can use, and they're really expensive, like specialty knife oils and dry lubes that you can use. Have at it. You know, I specifically brought up the things that I brought up because they're easy to get, they're simple, and they're inexpensive. The one thing I haven't mentioned is sharpening and stropping, but I think that's kind of a given. You do want to get a decent sharpening system. The little Lansky rod sharpener is not bad. The Spyderco Sharp Maker is good for, you know, getting started. And then maybe someday you'll want to go up to like a Wicked Edge or an Edge Pro Apex or something like that. I haven't got to that point yet. Maybe I never will. Maybe I will. I don't know. But those are some simple, helpful things. And finally, a strop. I do have my strop here, but it's out of reach, so I'm not going to go and get it for you. But a leather strop is super easy to make and really, really helpful. It'll make a huge difference in maintaining the edge of your knives, especially really high quality steels. A lot of times, if you just strop them daily, you can go a long time between sharpening. All right, so there you go, guys. I hope this video was a little bit helpful, a little bit interesting. Just one last look at those blades. There's the Doug Ritter Griptilian, smooth as silk now, works just the way I would expect a Benchmade to work. There's the CRKT M16. Again, very, very smooth, very, very fast opening, all because of a little bit of maintenance. Now, the American Lawman was a little more involved, obviously, because I stripped all the black coating off. That wasn't easy, but I just used a typical metal stripper from the hardware store. It did come off eventually. I've had people mention that it's hard to strip off with a traditional metal strippers. I don't know. I just got one from the hardware store. I'll be honest, I can't remember what it was, so I just picked up the first one that I saw. And this did come off very, very easily. I do need to, I'm going to strip my Recon 1 as well. But those are all little simple things you can do. And then if you get really ambitious, you know, buy yourself a Boker Quaken and anodize the titanium in the hardware, or maybe, you know, do some kind of cut-in pattern with a grinder. I don't know, have fun. Don't be afraid of your knives though. You know, you bought them to use and you want to keep them in the best working order that you can. All right. Oh yeah, the Rat 1 I didn't bring in for the second showing. Great knife. Man, this thing is hard to beat for the size, for the money, all things considered. This is a totally great blade. All right, there you go. Hope you enjoyed the video, and I'll talk to you soon.